Okay, so we're just past the hour. We're about to get started. Welcome to our public workshop today on creating inclusive workplaces, a collaboration between Leading Change Canada and Natural Resources Canada. I'm Ty Jacob. I'm the Education Program Coordinator at Leading Change Canada. Today, we'll be presenting some insights from a series of workshops we ran on inclusive workplaces at the Leading Change and Globe Forums in February 2020. An important aspect of creating inclusive workplaces is through building and sustaining relationships with Indigenous peoples. While we're all uprooted and convene in digital spaces, we do want to take a moment to ground ourselves in acknowledging the importance of land, especially in the context of work that we do at Natural Resources Canada and Leading Change Canada on biodiversity, nature-based solutions, and climate change. Today, I'm in Toronto, or TK-Ronto. I'm on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples in Treaty 13 territory. If you know the land or treaty you're situated on, feel free to type it in the chat and take a moment to give thanks to the original stewards of the land. If you don't know much about the land that you're on, we encourage you to use this time while we're in a collective moment of reflection to educate yourself, and we'll share some resources in the chat box that you can look to. All right, so today you'll be hearing from Consuelo Van Beek, Senior Advisor and Manager in the Science and Technology Internship Program at NRCan, Marertu Frisa, the Program Manager of Diversity and Inclusion at Electricity Human Resources Canada, and two youth presenters from Leading Change, Chris Zhu and Natasha Donahue, who will be introducing themselves later. After these presentations, we'll move into some guided reflection exercises and Q&A to help employers and employees envision what inclusive workplaces can look like. The session is being recorded and it will be shared with all of those who have registered after the completion of the session. And throughout the session, feel free to put questions into the Q&A or chat boxes. We'll be gathering them and we'll be able to answer them in the Q&A session at the end. I'll now give it over to Consuelo Van Beek to provide some context from NRCan.
Merci, Ty. Je m'appelle Consuelo Van Beek, and I'm the manager of NRCan's Science and Technology Internship Program, which we like to refer to as Green Jobs. And so our program is designed to provide youth with work experience and training opportunities in the natural resources sector with the goal to bridge the young people into the labor market. So over the last 4 years, we've created over 2,300 green jobs for youth across Canada in energy, forestry, mining, and earth sciences. And we've had internships in all provinces and territories. So in 2018, we were looking at our participant data for our program, and we noticed that there was very low participation by Indigenous and Northern youth. And we wanted to better understand why this was happening. So we had an opportunity to engage with youth, and you'll see on the slide here, we have done some engagement with Leading Change in the past in 2018. And in 2019, we had the opportunity to engage with over 200 Indigenous youth at the 7Gen Summit. That was a program or a summit that was put together for young people to discuss challenges of climate change, moving to a low carbon economy, and that sort of thing. So we wanted to participate in that summit to talk to Indigenous youth about the barriers to employment that they're facing because of this data that we had analyzed. And we wanted to figure out what we could do to respond. So we had an awesome session. We actually did 3 different engagements at the 7Gen Summit. And there was a number of findings that we came out of the conference with, but and we were, since able to update our eligibility and change our program. But one barrier that was raised at the roundtable that many Indigenous youth sort of often felt was this being recruited into an organization, but feeling tokenized when they actually entered into the workplace. And so and it wasn't even just feeling tokenized, but the idea that this person did not feel welcome in the workplace or included. And in some cases, they actually didn't feel safe in the environment that they were entering into. So that issue really struck me. And so when Leading Change approached NRCan and asked to see if we wanted to do some engagement with youth in February 2020, I floated this idea with Megan and the Leading Change team, and they said that this would be something that their delegates would like to get into. So before I hand it back to Ty and Megan on the Leading Change, just wanted to point out, I am the manager of a program. We fund employers. We want to understand what the employment issues are facing youth, but also the employers, and so that we can support them with tools and potentially additional funding to create these inclusive and safe workplaces for Canadian youth. So with that, I'll pass it back to Ty, I believe.
Yeah, thank you, Consuelo. So a little bit of background, some info about Leading Change. We're a national nonprofit, and we support youth and young professionals to be active participants in the transition to a low carbon economy. We operate in a unique constellation model with 3 other leading Canadian sustainability groups: the Globe Series, the Delphi Group, and the Excel Partnership. And each of us have our own respective missions and leadership, but we share a common vision that is a sustainable, prosperous, and socially just future within a generation. Because of our relationship with Globe, we host a biennial youth forum in conjunction with the Globe Forum, which is North America's largest and longest running sustainability and innovation summit. So we're really fortunate because this year we were able to host our flagship forum in Vancouver in February in person, right before everything with COVID started happening. And this year's forum brought together 150 young people aged 19 to 35, representing all Canadian provinces and territories. As part of the program, we ran workshops, heard from inspiring thought leaders, ran a number of intergenerational sessions fostering mentor connections and knowledge exchange, and even got to engage with a few federal ministers, including Minister O'Regan, who is pictured right here. A subset of the youth delegation participated in a series of visioning and sharing sessions that we co-developed with NRCan on inclusive workplaces. So I'll give you some structure on that workshop now. The first session that we did took place during the Leading Change Forum, and it had the objectives of hearing from youth about the characteristics of workplaces that made them feel welcome and included, and identifying key issues that employers could take action on to build nurturing and inclusive workplaces. We identified 2 youth table leads from our Leading Change delegation in advance, who facilitated conversations amongst their peers and took notes. The table leads came together with the support of facilitators to arrive at key findings and recommendations for employers. So that was in the first session. The second session, we invited some small and medium-sized orgs from the natural resource sector to attend. And the main objective of this session was to hold intergenerational discussion on inclusion in the workplace and bringing in some of the key findings and recommendations that were discussed in session 1. Employers present were led through a series of question prompts to help them identify and commit to concrete actions that their organizations could take. So with that, I would like to turn over the floor to Maretu Magofrisa, who will be talking about the importance of diversity and inclusion in the workplace.
Thank you, Ty. I want to start by acknowledging Leading Change in Natural Resources Canada for inviting me to speak on this important topic today. I know that diversity and inclusion are important values in today's society, where we're seeing its benefits. It provides a competitive advantage for our employers, who particularly are competing for talent, as we know, and it's also key in the world that's continuously changing. So while diversity tends to be focused on mostly on numbers and increasing representation, I definitely see the value in articulating its benefits beyond legal obligations that some of the employers today joining us might have. So real diversity and inclusion definitely requires a mental exercise that will be translated into an organization culture. That's the hope that I have today after this conversation. When it comes to our individual interactions, for instance, we usually start by the process of sharing our stories or listening to other stories. The stories, if we pay attention to them, would allow us to gather information, which in turn help us develop our awareness about issues some organizations, some individuals might have, about their experiences, about others, who the other is, and about ourselves as well. So this kind of awareness helps us in recognizing how, for example, your experience might be different from mine. As a Black woman, I probably have a more different experience from somebody who's from a different background. So the more we recognize differences, the more we start embracing uncertainty. We would be okay with that person from a certain ethnicity, for instance. We'll be okay with a person from a certain race, from a certain background, from a certain age. That we will not be fearing what's not familiar with us. For instance, I will not be bothered if someone from a different background joins our team, your team, or your organization, or just a circle that you're familiar with. So over time, our positive approach towards uncertainty would allow us, in my understanding, to respect the difference and eventually honor it, which ultimately would lead us for us to appreciate the difference. So as an employer, or even employees ourselves, youth, we should practice this mental exercise and to be lead by example with our team, and also within our organization to create an organization that is inclusive, focusing from diversity, transforming it to inclusion. So when we appreciate, when you talk about appreciating diversity and inclusion, for instance, it's important for all of our employers to be leading by example and leading with our work, leading with what we are, how we manage ourselves and how we manage our team. So the first thing we should do is develop an understanding that we are all unique individuals. We all bring some value to the workplace. We have to view differences as opportunities, not something as threatening. Our work and communication style, for example, are related to how we see it and interact in the world. Our backgrounds, for example, whether it's family background, education, or personal life experiences, abilities, all of them show how we are different. And even including the way we interact and how we react and how we perform in the workplace is influenced by how we are brought up, how we understand the world we live in, and how we have experienced our lives. So as an employer, all of us should evaluate whether we acknowledge differences or seeing it as a threat. For example, do you disregard someone's idea because they are the youngest in the team? Or are they your go-to people because you think they are full of new ideas, which is something that we always observe. So we have to remember that as there are negative stereotypes saying like, this group cannot do something, this group is always like this, there's also a positive stereotype which could disadvantage as soon as we exclude others by focusing on the positive. So when we engage with youth, for example, we sometimes say youth are lazy, youth are this, and then sometimes we say, oh, the youth might know something, so let me go to them. So as soon as we kind of categorize and see differences, focus on differences, we tend to disadvantage a certain group or an individual and create an exclusion. So appreciating diversity and inclusion is for us to understand the uniqueness so that we can benefit from it. And again, acknowledging difference is not seeing it as a threat, but it should help us develop our self-awareness as well. We have to look things in a different lens. We have to know that the way I see things probably is not the same as the person next to me looks at them. So that's how we should be looking at the value of diversity inclusion and how it's beneficial for it. Sometimes we're not even aware that some of our reactions and interactions are related to who we are as a person. Sometimes it's based on our assumption or something that we heard about some group that without any fact that we rely on that information and exclude them from our team or even from hiring them. So as an employer, we always continuously should self-evaluate our reactions. We should ask some questions. how is my identity, my background, who I am, with the way those schools that I went to is influencing my perception of youth, for example, or my assumptions about the behavior of youth. Am I biased towards others? When do I feel comfortable? When do I feel the least comfortable with somebody? Those are the things that we should really be mindful of when we are working with youth and generally with employers in our circle. So employees with our circle. So these are all important questions that we should regularly ask ourselves. And because it's much easier for us to be comfortable with the uncomfortable, even though it might take a very long process, it might take a long time in process for us to get to that level of being comfortable with the uncomfortable. But it's always important to challenge our own assumptions, to challenge our fears, to challenge our doubts, so that we can easily work with someone that's not from the same experience, or from the same background, from the same upbringing, or just the fear of, we're in the context of today, working with youth. So achieving comfort with diversity allows us to explore, learn, and discover what we don't know about others and about our own reactions, because sometimes unless we come face to face with something that we don't know, we don't realize we have that kind of reaction. But we should be comfortable with even having a different reaction about the new experiences that we have. But we should be mindful about that mind exercise that I mentioned. We should be going to the first place of appreciating diversity and inclusion for us to be comfortable in managing whoever comes, whether youth, indigenous people, or people with disability, or visible minority group, whoever comes to you. If you have that mental exercise, starts from the appreciation, you always see the value in the benefit of diversity and inclusion. So sometimes we do things perfectly. We are so sure of ourselves. We have our diversity inclusion efforts are successful, but then we go to the disconnect. And we have to be very careful. And I see this a lot with a lot of companies and organizations that they champion diversity inclusion, but there's some kind of disconnect that happens. And to avoid this, we have to make our efforts visible and meaningful. Usually, an employer's diversity inclusion efforts become invisible because employees definitely misunderstand the approach that we're taking. If your hiring efforts are focused on youth, then you have to make your efforts visible and ensure transparency. Share why it's important for you to hire youth. Share that information with a wider organization. That way, we will not go into this quota conversation we usually have when they're hiring youth because of this. They're hiring, but make it so visible that you are trying to create a blend of talent that optimizes performance. If you're not framing it in a way that benefits the organization, the benefit to the organization is benefiting each individual, this will not be a misunderstanding. So don't forget to make it meaningful too by communicating every value you have about diversity and inclusion and fully engaging with all employees. Because studies show that youth are engaged when they feel connected and are contributing to something larger than themselves. So you have to always communicate why you do things and why you're not doing certain things, why it's not important at the moment, but you will follow through to it. Like things like that, communication is very important to engage and get a response from youth. It's also important to identify barriers and address them. For instance, in your recruitment and hiring engaging strategies, which is definitely a value for equity, ensure that you make it work for everyone by identifying hiring practices that are systematically disadvantaging certain groups. Do you hire someone because they went to your school or went to the school that one of your family members went to? With regards to engagement, do you evaluate your employee, how your employees feel about the workplace, or youth feel about the workplace? How do they evaluate the workplace? How do they look at it? What are their perceptions? You have to continuously look at this because you have to identify the barriers and then address them so that you continuously evolve and adjust your system and the way you manage your organization. The other area is in create a collaborate. You have to collaborate with youth and as if they're your equal. One of the reasons why that is important is because you will have to address misconceptions because we have biases. The youth cannot do this, or youth is not capable of leading. We definitely know that leading change is actually leading. So we know that there's certain youth behavior that we can benefit from if you're looking into the world that is continuously evolving. So the tokenism is actually applies to every individual we try to hire because we want to look like we're championing diversity inclusion. That should not be the case. We always have to hire because we benefit from it, and also provide an opportunity for the youth to grow, to develop, and kind of evolve in the workplace. So considering the limited time we have, I will definitely wrap up in a couple of seconds. So what I've discussed with you are all important steps we should be taking to ensure that we are all walking the talk when it comes to diversity and inclusion, and particularly to engage with youth, to engage with Indigenous people, to engage with visible minority groups, to engage with anyone who's disadvantaged in the current work environment. So a final word, and my challenge for all employers who are attending this event today, is to be vulnerable and authentic, both as an individual and as leaders in an organization that you're working on, to see the change that you're working for, to change, to benefit from the change you're working towards, and also champion the cause of diversity and inclusion. That would be it from me, and I appreciate the time that was given to me. And if you have any questions, I'm around to address them. Thank you.
Thank you, Marotu. I really love what you had to say about employers, how important it is for employers to be really transparent about why they're seeking diversity and why it's meaningful for them and their teams. I think that's a really great recommendation among all your other recommendations also. So now it's time for us to hear from the two youth table leads who are going to share some of the findings and recommendations that we came up with at the sessions in February at the Leading Change in Globe forums. So Chris and Natasha, over to you.
Thank you. So hi, everybody. My name is Natasha Donahue. I go by she, her, or they, them pronouns. I'm here today from the traditional territory of the Stoney, the Métis, the Cree, and the Woodland Cree, also known as Barrhead, Alberta. And I'm here today because I'm passionate about creating, supporting, and maintaining inclusive spaces for all individuals. And also I'm passionate about helping others to take those same steps forward, especially around the idea of learning how to be comfortable with being uncomfortable, as Marotu was speaking to earlier.
Thanks, Natasha. Hi, everyone. My name is Chris Zhou, and I'm a staffer for a federal minister. I grew up on Prince Edward Island, the traditional land of the Mi'kmaq people. It's a beautiful place, but it's not exactly the most diverse environment in Canada. And it was really during university when I served on the Prime Minister's Youth Council, working with young people from across the country, that I really recognized how diversity drives creativity and how what we call inclusivity and inclusion makes the workplace better, not only for young people, but for everyone. And as Ty mentioned earlier, Natasha and I participated in these sessions at the Leading Change in Globe forums back in February, which felt like a lifetime ago. And we discussed the characteristics of workplace that would make all young people feel welcomed and included. And we also wanted to add key issues for employers to pay attention to when building an inclusive workplace, and to share our insights with employers to identify concrete steps that they could take to make diverse youth feel welcomed. So Natasha and I will be sharing some of the findings we came up with you right now.
So in our small group discussions at the forum, we identified 7 different qualities of an inclusive workplace. This is not a comprehensive list, but it's a good starting point for employers to consider what qualities they should be working toward in their workplaces. So these qualities include an appreciation and understanding of the needs of people with diverse backgrounds, as everyone has a different life experience and perspective, and those experiences and perspectives are important to hear and support. Creating a space that feels safe to those with different experiences from the majority. And in part, safe spaces can be created by this next point, which is fostering trust between employers and employees, earned through performance and social interaction. Youth having their opinions and thoughts acknowledged and appreciated by management and colleagues. And then on the next slide here, we have management supporting an environment where individuals can be themselves and respect for individual identities. Organizations and individuals engaging in reflection on a regular basis, and organizations that value strong teamwork, employee recognition, open communication, and learning at all levels.
Thanks, Natasha. And we also identified some key actions that employers, that you can take to make your workplaces more inclusive. Again, it's not a comprehensive list, but it is, we hope, a helpful starting point for employers. Some of the action items we came up with included recognizing the importance of creating safe spaces for minority groups to decompress and engage in cultural activities. For example, one of my previous workplaces had a dedicated prayer room. Building cultural competences and knowledge based on reconciliation with Indigenous peoples, something that Meritu eloquently talked about earlier, and also adjusting processes and structures in workplaces to reflect other models of decision-making that may be more inclusive. For example, we would like organizations to start including more young people and underrepresented groups at decision-making tables. Now, I'm not suggesting we put young people on a special pedestal and take our word as gospel. We, like yourselves, appreciate being included and listened to, and we believe we can offer a unique perspective. So on the next slide, we also want to emphasize creating human connections in the workplace and making space for socializing between employees and management. Mentorship systems, whether formal or informal, are great for this. Another thing we really appreciate and respect is a leadership that celebrates failure and shows vulnerabilities and invites others to do the same. Also, supporting skill building for new, middle, and senior management to change behaviors in the workplace and to learn from each other. So a few months back, I had the opportunity to shadow the Canadian CEO of Facebook for a day. And one framework that he implements in Facebook in Canada is reverse mentorship and the belief that everyone can learn from anyone, which I thought was a great attitude and great structure and system to have in your workplace and something that maybe you can try out yourself. Back to you, Natasha.
Thanks, Chris. Based on our discussions at the forum, we also identified 3 key issues for employers to pay attention to while you're building and nurturing an inclusive workplace. So those key issues include decolonizing the workplace through education and restructuring power. This partly happens through recognizing the emotional labor that minorities go through and creating safe spaces for them to connect with their culture and practices. So some ways you might be able to accomplish some steps towards decolonization are to support professional development through courses, speakers, maybe doing a blanket exercise in your workplace, addressing colonial structures within the workplace by seeking and supporting education on the history and impacts of colonization, supporting personal efforts to decolonize thinking and acting, as this is a very individual type of action at much of the time. Support personal efforts to, support indigenization by actively seeking out and including Indigenous voices and culture into daily life. Seek education on Indigenous ways of living and knowing, cultural practices and protocols, and incorporate them into the workplace. And learning how to be uncomfortable. This was already spoken to earlier, but this is a big part of the indigenization and decolonization process. And it's important to be okay with feeling that way. Another point another key issue, I should say, that we identified is leading by example, showing a human side, being vulnerable in order to invite others to be the same, and also supporting social activities that encourage interaction and trust building between different generations and parts of the organization. And back to you, Chris.
Thanks. And finally, the last key issue we identified is training to change behavior with the focus on employees at all levels. So we think that training should include learnings around cultural sensitivity, triggers, and language for harm reduction. Also, workplaces should be encouraging intergenerational dialogue for learning and building understanding. So as young people, I hope I can keep on saying that for a few more years, we felt the sessions were successful in making space for this important dialogue about inclusion in the workplace. However, we wanted to speak to a wider range of employers about the key insights we identified. And that's why I just want to take a second to thank each and every one of you on this Zoom call for joining us today. We hope that you can take these insights and put them to work in your workplaces. And if you ever feel that you're not sure how to proceed, look around you. You might have more diverse youth on your team than you thought. Reach out, we're always happy to chat, or you can just catch up with Maritu, who's also an amazing person and an amazing resource. That's it from us. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Chris and Natasha, for being with us today and sharing those insights on behalf of your peers. That was great. So now we're going to move into some reflection exercises. It's a really important part of transforming workplaces to be more inclusive. So taking the time to reflect on what we can be doing differently allows those moments of transformation to actually happen. So we have about 10 or so minutes now in which we're going to engage in these reflection exercises. Today I have 3 reflection questions for folks in the audience to think about as employers and employees. You'll have about 2 to 3 minutes to reflect on these questions. So we'll have 2 to 3 minutes per question. So I recommend pulling up a notes document or a Word document or even a pen and paper to really get into the meat and potatoes of what we've been talking about today and think about how you can apply these recommendations to your workplace. So moving to the first reflection question. Question 1 is, which youth recommendations is your organization currently meeting or working on? So we've put on this slide a list of the different youth recommendations that Natasha and Chris just covered. And you'll have about 2 or 3 minutes now to pull up that Word document or pull out your pen and paper and reflect on which one of these you're seeing in place or being worked on at your workplace. So a couple more minutes for this, but if as you're brainstorming or reflecting, you want to put some of those reflections into the chat, feel free to do so. Okay, moving on to question 2. Now take some time to reflect on which youth recommendations are new to you or you haven't been able to work on. And I'll give you 2 minutes to do that as well. And also feel free to place any reflections in the chat. Okay, and for our final question, our final reflection prompt on the next slide. Megan, if you can change the slide when you have a chance. What would you need in order to take action to create more inclusive workplaces? So as you're thinking to this question, what information do you need? What resources do you need? Do you need external consultation? Do you need to hire a staff person? These are things to be thinking through as you're thinking about how you can be taking these actions to create more inclusive workplaces. And I'll give you a minute or so to reflect on this before we open up to Q&A. And again, we would love to hear any of your reflections or ideas in the chat. So feel free to place them in there if you would like. Okay, so what I would recommend is if you have collected these questions and have started reflecting on them, they're great prompts as employers and even as employees to begin thinking about how to take these youth recommendations back to your workplaces and actually start transforming them into more inclusive workplaces. So these prompts are a great starting point, and I would recommend continuing to return to them as you're going through the process of thinking through how your workplace could become more inclusive and diverse. We're going to open it up to Q&A. And I'm just going to see if anyone wants to put any questions in the chat or in the Q&A, and then I'll dive into some of them. So one question that I have for all the panelists is whether they have an example of a workplace where they felt included and supported. So if anyone wants to jump in, I would love to hear from you.
Mary, I see you unmuted. Do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I can go ahead. An example of a workplace you've worked in where you felt included and supported. Well, I can tell you that the fact that I'm hired to work is one example of being feeling included, because I can share an experience that you probably might notice my name is very unique and it's different. Sometimes people find it difficult to pronounce. But it also has been, I'm very proud of my name because it has a very good meaning, but it has been a deterrent in an area that I felt I was excluded because of that. And also, again, my background. And the first job I got is where I felt included and supported, because the person who took the first step in hiring me had made me feel included, because before then, a lot of people were disregarding my applications or speaking to me and then disregarding my talent. So I felt the first time I felt included is the first job opportunity I had, and which got me to this point. So that's my insight.
Chris or Natasha, do you have any examples?
Yeah, I can give an example. So my current job, so I'm working for the Federal Minister of Small Business, International Trade and Export Promotion. And the team is actually one of the most diverse teams on Parliament Hill. The minister herself is Chinese Canadian, so I think she's leading a culture of that. So like once I got the offer, I was just bombarded with emails and text messages of my colleagues, like proactively reaching out, telling me that if I had any questions, feel free to talk to them, and they offered to set up chats with me. And then one of my colleagues offered me to get bubble tea with her. So just like small things like that, like bubble tea is like a very cultural thing, but even just being proactive in offering help to young people, knowing that they're new. I think that's something that I really appreciated. And I think that's something that like new employees, especially if they're young, if it's their first job, that they would appreciate as well.
I think for me, a good example that comes to the top of my mind is a workplace that supports identity. And I think part of doing that that has helped make me feel supported, included, have been encouraging the use of finding out people's pronouns, whether or not that's in an introduction or something else. So maybe also using your own pronouns when you're communicating with people in order to normalize that and kind of show publicly that people are free to express their own identity that way. But it also extends out to things like accessibility needs, making people feel comfortable, letting you know what kinds of extra supports they might need that kind of differ from the norm. And not feeling like that's a challenging conversation to have. That should be an easy, safe conversation to have with an employee. And I also think using land acknowledgements is really important, even if we're in this in like a distributed environment like the one we're in today, or if you're working with a close local group of people. I think acknowledging the land you're on helps to make a lot of people feel safe and accepted and valued in the environment. And those have personally affected me.
Amazing recommendations. So another question I have for you is, how can employers make sure that these recommendations are implemented for the long run? So, you know, this intervention doesn't just happen once, but the intervention to create more inclusive workplaces happens over time and actually has longevity. And before I get folks to answer that question, I do want to call out something that Corey Beaver put in the chat while we were doing reflection exercises that I didn't catch before we moved into questions. But I think that what Corey said is actually super insightful to a question like this. So Corey wrote, I think employers who have Indigenous representation could benefit off of the wisdom of elders from their respective territories and continuing accountability and making sure there is clear communication. So I think those are some great beginning recommendations from Corey, but I would also love to hear what the three of you have to say about it as well.
I guess I can jump in if that's okay. So I have a few things that spring to mind, and I think the first one is leading by example. I think you kind of have to show people what it means to incorporate these kinds of actions into their daily life, and also show that you're putting the effort into it yourself, so that other people are motivated to continue these types of projects and this type of work. I think you shouldn't allow yourself to get complacent with what you're doing and think like, oh, you know, we have land acknowledgements implemented now, so that's enough, because there's always more that we can do. There's a lot to explore here. And I think this is more maybe a tangible action you can take, but depending on what kind of organization we're talking about, I think striking some kind of equity, diversity, and inclusion committee or group or something like that that's led by a core group of people who are passionate about this kind of work, or who have insights that they wish to share with the organization is a good idea, so that you can consistently explore some of these ideas and build on them.
I think that's a great point, Natasha. And I think just adding on top of that, another great way to make sure that it's institutionalized is that you formalize the process so that it can become a part of the culture of the team itself. So as an example, I did a year abroad in China where I worked at a tech startup. And at the beginning, we had this like just one-on-one, like informal mentorship session where we had weekly meetings, but those were extremely productive. So the company actually started a formal buddy system throughout the entire company, and they formalized it into the weekly schedules of the employees. And that became something that was really appreciated. And speaking of tech companies, I think, so when I usually explain this to people, I find a really useful analogy would be, imagine that you are someone who's perhaps more elderly and not quite familiar with technology, and you're just hired into a tech company, and everyone around you are in their 20s, super hip, super techy, like avocado toast and everything, right? You feel totally out of place. That's kind of how we feel going into a normal workplace. So a really great way to think about what should you do or what should we do is to put yourself in that thought experiment with that fictional scenario and think about, well, what would I want my employers or my colleagues to do for me to make sure that I fit in and I can actually contribute to getting results on the team.
Marisha, did you have anything you wanted to add? It's totally fine if you don't.
Well, I think Natasha and Chris brought very good points. I mean, in terms of, I think it's always good to make our efforts visible, like I mentioned earlier, but it's also important to sympathize with, I mean, reflect back on our experiences and also reflect back. Usually it's very good to connect your personal experiences to the workplace, because we always bring our personal experiences to the workplace, which means outside of the workplace, whether we're leaders or team leads or managers, we have a life that would put us in a position of vulnerability. So when we go to the workplace, we also have to think about, okay, outside of the workplace, let's say if you're a parent, if you have an elderly parent, you always are a child. So there's a certain way that you'll be treated. So usually it's always good to put yourself in different positions in life to make sure that you humanize your experiences, you humanize the experience of others as you lead, as you manage. So that's why it's always important to really connect with what Corey has mentioned about connecting with the elderly, because you have this position of understanding the expectations and then also putting yourself in a position of, even if you're a leader, you have the resources that you can use to move this dialogue further in the workplace. So that's what I want to add.
Awesome. Also, I have a question specifically for Natasha. Just because you briefly mentioned the blanket exercise as a way of decolonizing the workplace, and I would love if you could sort of dive more into what that is and how that helps people to better understand colonization and thereby understand what decolonization can look like.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the blanket exercise, from my own personal experience, is a really good way to open the door for a lot of folks who have limited education in the effects of colonization in Canada. Essentially, it's a very interactive exercise, and I'm not sure if there's maybe like a COVID version that's been developed or anything like that. So that might be something that we need to look into, but essentially what happens is people are put amongst blankets on the ground, which symbolize different territories of Turtle Island. And the exercise moves through the history of colonization in Canada and how taking away the territory and changing the way Indigenous peoples in Canada are able to use their land and govern themselves and partake in, their cultural practices and protocols, how that's affected them in the long run. And I think it's very eye-opening for a lot of folks who maybe don't have that foundational education. And it's also very powerful. But even if people do have that education, I think it's still a really good activity so that you can better empathize with some of these experiences and sort of put yourself into the perspectives of the people who've had to suffer through these generations of trauma. And I think that maybe is where I would leave it for now.
For sure. Thanks, Natasha. So Adrita put in the chat, in regards to including land acknowledgements to create a more inclusive environment, I also read this post was suggested providing additional resources to your audience to learn more about the Indigenous community on the land you're on, local initiatives, businesses, and causes that promote this. So, and also Corey put in the chat a link to a website that actually I think explains more about what the blanket exercise looks like. So here we have lots of tangible actions that people can take, employers can take to create more inclusive workplaces. I'm wondering if in addition to that, the three of you have any other tangible actions that you think employers could take back to their workplaces.
If you give me permission, I have 3 points that I think people would strategize in thinking. There are so many points, it could not be summarized in 3, but I would definitely suggest 3 target topics that you can focus on. So one of it is to start something new based on our conversation today, even though it's a very short 1-hour conversation. What are the new things that you want to start doing when you go to the workplace based on what you have learned from this group discussion? So the first strategy is to start doing something new that you've never done before. And then the second strategy is what is it something that you're doing? It could be behavior, it could be an action that you have observed, something that you observe in the workplace that is not working for you, that you should be stopping. Think about what those are that would be deterrent to hiring or even include creating an inclusive workplace. So think about what you should be stop to do, considering the conversation that we had today. And also, what is it something that you're doing that is working for your organization to advance, for your organization to be more inclusive, for your organization to have equitable processes? What is something that is currently that you're doing that's working, but you need to make sure that you evolve it and you advance it in a way that really works, adapting to the new generation of employees, the new strategy that the world is very rapidly changing. We're seeing what COVID-19 is doing. We have a different way of managing our employees through and having conversations via Zoom rather than the everyday face-to-face. So what are the things that are working, but you need to adapt and change it? So if you think about what you want to start new, what you want to stop so that you advance, and what you want to continue, if you think about all the actions and processes and initiatives that you have in terms of the 3 areas, the start, stop, continue, you will definitely advance in your ways in diversity inclusion.
I think that was awesome. Just one more thing to add. I think a really easy and really tangible thing to do, just like even today, is just familiarize yourself with events of activities of cultural significance. For instance, Hanukkah is in 2 weeks. Something as simple as that. So on that day, wish your colleagues happy Hanukkah if appropriate. Like small gestures like that can also mean a lot for someone.
I just want to say, as someone who is Jewish, it's very nice to hear someone say that. I have gotten important work calls when I've been off of work for some of the most sacred Jewish holidays, and that makes me feel like people have not considered the fact that I have diverse needs as an employee. So yeah, taking different people's holidays into consideration, Jewish holidays, Muslim holidays, Hindu holidays, etc., is so important for making different employees feel like they're actually included and appreciated in their workplace.
I don't know if I would add anything much to that. I think I would just end up reiterating a bunch of points that I think we've already made today. And I think maybe one of the big ones is really learning how to be vulnerable if you haven't already started doing that. And part of that is gaining emotional intelligence in order to be aware of all of these diverse needs that might be around you. So I think that's all I would add to what everyone else has said.
If I can interject, one thought about like vulnerability as leaders, vulnerability is key to advance in your leadership, and it means you can ask any question that you want to ask without the fear of being judged. And also that's the only way we can advance. And when you're not really sure about anything, any information that really requires you to lead with change in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion, it's always safe to ask questions. I'm sure there's no one in the world that will really ask you for asking questions. Simple as that. Vulnerability means that I don't know some few things, and there are things that I don't know, so I feel comfortable asking. That's vulnerability. As a leader, you're not expected to know everything, but vulnerability means like acknowledging that you don't know everything because we don't know what we don't know. So that's my final word. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, any final thoughts or pieces from the rest of the panelists? Okay, and also Janice has put a comment in the chat about how land acknowledgements can be seen as an easy win, but in order to not be empty, they have to be accompanied by reconciliation activities and action. So I think that's a really, really important point too. So before we wrap up, we wanted to acknowledge the other youth table leads, employers, organizers, and supporters behind the scenes of this initiative. There's so many names on this page because it takes so many people to make things like this happen. So thank you to all of them. Corey also, who's been super active in the chat today, was one of the youth table leads. And I would love it if you could join me in giving them a virtual round of applause. If you have questions about NRCan's youth employment initiatives or Leading Change Canada, we encourage you to reach out to Consuelo or Megan, whose contact information is on the slide right here. And Consuelo, I'm just wondering if there is anything that you want to speak to, any next steps or activities envisioned to continue the momentum.
I think the big thing is just to say thank you to Leading Change for continuing this work. You know, we had this session in February and in before COVID times, and we wanted to ensure that these great recommendations are shared broadly. So super happy that we could work together. I'm super grateful to Natasha and Chris for being here today. Miratu, you're overseas and you're participating, so it's just so wonderful to have you here, and for all of obviously the employers that have participated in today's session. I think that this is just the beginning where, you know, these discussions will continue, but we don't want to just have it be a discussion. We want to see some concrete actions happen so that we ensure that workplaces are more inclusive and that young people feel safe. So on our side of things within our programming, we're looking at developing tools to support employers to build these inclusive workplaces. You know, it's we're not going to solve everything, but there are some concrete things that we can do to support the employers that we're funding through the Green Jobs program. So that's something that we've taken on, and we're going to continue to have these dialogues internally within NRCan, also with our partners with the Youth Employment Strategy, Employment and Social Development Canada. We're going to be having this same discussion with them, I believe, in a couple of weeks. So we'll just keep trying to make space at the table for young people to share their voices and to be able to advise decision makers about this really important issue. So thanks again, everyone.
Thank you, Consuelo. So yeah, thank you again to all the presenters and all of the attendees for taking time out of your day to talk about and listen to us talk about a super important topic. The session has been recorded. The recording will be sent to you at the completion of the session. And so happy that we could be having this conversation, and wishing all of you a great rest of your day.